Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Brave New World. By Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932. George Orwell's 1984, which came out 17 years after 1984, is often linked to 1984 because of the similarities between the two works. In the wake of its publishing, the critical response to Brave New Worlds was varied, with some critics hailing it as a masterpiece and others deeming it anti-family and anti-religious. The novel depicts a hypothetical future London in the year AF 632 via the eyes of the author's characters, 80-25-40 by our standards of time measurement. A new world order known as the world state is introduced in the novel. Dictatorship. The world state worships Henry Ford, the inventor of the Model T car, and is ruled by 10 separate world controllers. Henry Ford is a historical figure revered by the state. The state has managed the world's population using various artificial reproduction methods and encouraged all citizens to accept their position in one of 5 castes. For each caste there is an alphabetical ranking, from alpha to epsilon. These are children who will one day become world leaders and great thinkers for the state, while the lower-ranking epsilon castes are meant to undertake menial tasks and hard work. The hatchery is where the castes are born and raised, where they are indoctrinated with subliminal messages and brainwashing. For the majority of the novel's action, Lenina Crown and Bernard Marx are 2 hatchery workers who have a strained relationship. Bernard is an outspoken critic of the factory's practices, and he does so against his own best interests. Lenina's work is now more respected and recognized in the community. New Mexico's Savage Reservation is where the state sends the outlying members of its castes for a vacation. He was born and nurtured outside the hatchery by a young woman named John. John expresses his want to tour the world and requests that they return him to the world state with the 2 men they met earlier. Aside from being a de facto handler for John, Bernard becomes somewhat of a pseudo-celebrity when they return. There is a deterioration in the 2 men's relationship very quickly. It becomes out that John is unstable and undeveloped emotionally. They must ask forgiveness or be exiled permanently if they are summoned before the head of their community to explain themselves. The tale opens in the central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre in the year AF 632. Hatchery director is giving a tour of the factory to a group of young pupils. This world's humans are no longer born but are instead manufactured by the artificial fertilization of ovaries that have been surgically removed. On top of raising and conditioning their progeny for placement in one of 5 castes, the world state's hatcheries were responsible for 100% of all world births. It goes like this. Alpha embryos are destined to become world leaders, while gamma embryos are divided into 96 clone human beings per egg, and so on until epsilon embryos are put through a process that divide them into 96 clone human beings per egg, who are destined to carry out hard labor and menial work. His approach is called PodSnap, and it's designed to speed up the development of eggs within an ovary. Within 2 years, he claims that with this approach, hundreds of offspring can be born from the same mother and father's ovaries and spermatozoa. Employee Henry Foster tells the pupils that this facility has produced a record number of siblings from 2 parents, 16,001. Fertilization is followed by the placement of the embryos in custom-made bottles, which are then placed on a conveyor belt for an average gestation period of 267 days. Decanted on the final day, they are deemed to be alive. There are various treatments given to the fetuses based on what caste they would be allotted. Oxygen deprivation and alcohol therapy are used to reduce the IQ of fetuses in the lowest 3 castes. A heat therapy is provided for fetuses who will work in hotter locations. Female fetuses known as freemartins are sterilized at birth. It's up to Lenina Crown, who's been assigned to immunize all of the children who will be working in the tropics after the director has shown them how it all works. The director finds it hilarious that Henry Foster picks that exact moment to bring up their rendezvous with Lenina earlier that day. Next, the students see the infant nurseries and neo-Pavlovian conditioning rooms, as they are referred to in the hatchery. It's here that the hatchery trains and molds newborns' preferences based on their caste. There is an electric shock and an alert going off as students see newborns dressed in the khaki uniforms of the Delta caste happily crawl toward nurses carrying out books and flowers. Babies will become averse to books and lovely things after roughly 200 repetitions, according to the director. As a result, the children will know not to waste society's time with fancy thoughts of wanting to read books and engage in creative activities. Filmmaker Ruben, named after the protagonist's Polish parents, is the subject of the director's story. A few pupils' faces get red as he begins the story. Words like parents and mother and father are no longer acceptable in the world state since they have acquired a sexual connotation. The director, ignoring the commotion, resumes his narration. His parents left the radio on in Reuben's room while he slept, and when the youngster woke up, they found him reading an entire speech by George Bernard Shaw from beginning to end. An investigation into a type of teaching children while they sleep, known as hypnopedia, was launched after the parents took their child to the doctor. This was just 23 years later, according to the director, than when the first Model T went on sale. He makes a T symbol with his tummy as he says this, and the pupils all mimic the motion in reverence. The director then takes the pupils to an elementary school class where the students are all asleep and a recorded voice whispers to them about the inequality between the castes to show them what hypnopedic learning really is. This is followed by a trip to a garden containing hundreds of naked children. According to him, youngsters are encouraged to engage in sensual play as well as games involving complex machinery. Erotic games are used to teach the youngsters about the stigma around sex and help them better understand how sexual repression formerly played a large role in their society. A man interrupts him while he is trying to explain this to me. This is his Ford ship Mustafa Mond, and the director is delighted to see him. As one of the 10 world controllers that oversee the whole world state, Mond is considered the resident controller for Western Europe. Mond is frank and joyful with the kids, and he explains them how the world state has become what it is today through the regulation of emotions. There was initially resistance to the state's use of caste, among other things, but the 9 Years' War included chemical and biological attacks and subversive propaganda on the part of the state that gradually destroyed the resistance, according to him. Religion, the concept of families, and classic literature were all outlawed as a result of World War II. To mark the beginning of a new era, all dates now begin with the initial A.F. after Ford, following the first sale of Henry Ford's Model T. People are now allowed to live their entire lives with a youthful body, overcoming the ravages of old age. It's 4:20 at the end of the workday, so a factory whistle blares as Mond finishes his sentence. In the privacy of their own home, Lenina and Henry get ready for their next date. His departure from the party is marked by his snub of Bernard Marx, an unsavory character. Bernard is outraged when he overhears Henry and another factory worker discussing Lenina in a filthy manner in the changing room. Henry decides to play Bernard by offering him soma, a narcotic, in order to get him into a conversation. Infuriated, Bernard reacts angrily to the two men's mockery. Lenina is talking about her date with Henry with a girl named Fanny in the women's changing room. Fanny is surprised that Lenina is still seeing Henry 4 months after they first started dating. Prostitution is seen as noble in the world state by her, thus she pushes her to be more promiscuous. Bernard Marx allegedly invited Lenina to a savage reservation, according to Lenina. Fanny tells Bernard that he has a reputation for being too vocal and for being smaller and weaker than other alphas. Because she likes him, though, Lenina accepts his invitation. Lenina tells Henry before she leaves for her date that she accepts his invitation to travel to the reservation. In front of their co-workers, she brought up this matter, and Bernard felt humiliated. Upon her departure, he is left with an unusual feeling, as if she had acted normally in not caring about revealing her sexual life in front of others while he was the one who was ashamed. His size worries Bernard, since most alphas are larger and broader and lower caste members link larger stature with higher prestige. His embryo was mistakenly infected with alcohol meant for another lower caste child, he says us, because of a rumor at the factory. After that, Bernard goes to see Helmholtz Watson, a professor at the College of Emotional Engineering who is a friend of his. A huge, handsome alpha who is also highly intelligent is said to be Helmholtz, the complete opposite of Bernard. Lenina accepted Bernard's invitation, but Helmholtz is preoccupied with his own drafting of hypnopedic phrases when Bernard informs him of her acceptance. That he is no longer satisfied with his position and seeks to be transferred elsewhere. Bernard is getting tense and jittery just listening to this. Bernard and Lenina go to a wrestling competition the following day. When Lenina encourages Bernard to take soma near the end of their date, Bernard snaps out of his funk and the two have some fun. Bernard gets the go-ahead from the Savage Reservation's director to visit the facility the next day. Upon seeing the name of the reservation, the director recalls a trip he took there 20 years before with a woman. During a storm, the woman became disoriented and was never found. The director, as if waking from a trance, realizes that he has revealed far too much of himself to Bernard and begins to chastise him, threatening to send him to an Icelandic hatchery for his antisocial behavior. The warden tells Bernard and Lenina a detailed account about the history of the reservation when they arrive there. Just as soon as he's out of there, Bernard calls Helmholtz and finds out that the director plans to exile him to Iceland when he returns. To calm Bernard's ire, Lenina offers him a soma. Bernard reluctantly agrees. A community ritual later, the two see a young kid being lashed to death while surrounded by writhing snakes. Bernard and Lenina are aghast at the news. To their amazement, they are approached by a young man with impeccable English skills. She was born outside the reservation and raised on the reservation. She got injured while visiting the area and was transported to the village by some Indians. Tamakin was the surname of his father, and he claims to be from outside the reservation. It doesn't take Bernard long to figure out that this must be the director and Linda's son, given that the director's real name is Thomas and Linda was the name of the lady he claimed to have lost 20 years prior. He is stunned, but he chooses to keep it to himself for now. Linda, John's mother, is introduced to Bernard and Lenina. Linda is an elderly woman with many wrinkles. It disgusts them since they have never seen an elderly person in the world state before. It is revealed that Linda is an outcast on the reserve for following her childhood programming and being open to sex with many of the men on the community due of this. Because of his mother, John claims to Bernard, he has never felt accepted in the community and has always longed to go to the other place, as he calls it, from Linda's stories. As a way of getting the director to let him stay, Bernard suggests that John accompany him back to London from New York City. John agrees to go, but only if he and his mother are permitted to bring their mother. Bernard has promised to inquire. On top of all that, Lenina takes a significant dose of soma in order to be temporarily disabled by the reservation. After hearing the story of John and Linda, Mustafa Mond telephones Bernard to tell him. After being convinced the mother and son are of scientific value, Mond accepts that he can issue directives authorizing their release into his custody. He breaks into Lenina's cabin while he is out and finds her in a soma-induced slumber, fearing Bernard has left without him. It scares him to touch her for fear of defiling her. The rear door of John's cabin becomes his escape route as he hears Bernard's footsteps coming. Bernard interrupts the director's scolding of Bernard's work ethic to present John and Linda to the group. Linda accuses the director of fathering her child as soon as she recognizes him. Inquiring if it's true, John stoops at the director's feet. Embarrassed, the director flees from the room while his co-workers chuckle at his expense. The savage becomes an immediate celebrity in high society as the savage after the director quits in a fit of rage. Bernard is able to keep his job in the second part of the book. When Bernard becomes John's guardian, he begins to rise in social standing. He is still doing the same and believes he is exempt from punishment because he discovered John's body. At first, John enjoys being the focus of attention, but he soon becomes overwhelmed by the disparities between the reservation and the world state's governing structure. The physical desire he feels for Lenina is both bewildering to him and shameful. John's reluctance to have sex with Lenina has left her bewildered. John refuses to leave his room the next time Bernard throws a party for significant people. This embarrassing episode causes concern for Bernard, who now fears he may be removed from his position as guardian of the boy. Fanny tells Lenina that she can no longer be sidetracked by other guys because of her longing for John. When Lenina visits John, she has taken soma in an attempt to seduce him. To Lenina, his declaration of affection and talk of marriage and old age frightens her. He becomes enraged and slaps her across the face as she rubs her body against his in an attempt to distract him. While John mopes around the living room, Lenina locks herself in the bathroom. John receives a phone call from his mother, who has been using soma to deal with her return to the state, while she is being held in prison. In the midst of his rush to the hospital, he is mistaken for an ex-lover of Linda's, a man named Pope, by Linda. She chokes and dies before John can get a nurse to help her out. Angry and outraged, John rants and raves furiously. His final act before departing the hospital is to stop a pair of Delta employees and tell them not to accept the soma meals they are receiving since he believes the medicine is intended to enslave the populace. Bernard and Helmholtz are summoned as well as the police when he gets into a confrontation with workers. Bernard, John, and Helmholtz are brought to Mustafa Mond's office by the police. Soma and civilization are two words John dislikes, and he admits that he is having a hard time adapting to the world state. Complained about the caste system and questioned why every child isn't made an alpha when they're born. Mond tells him that if everyone were an alpha, society would collapse since there would be no one to do the menial tasks. During this conversation, Mond tries to rationally explain why things are the way they are and how John's quest for truth will only bring him misery instead. Bernard and Helmholtz are finally informed by Mond that they will be expelled. Until two guys have to sedate him and remove him out of the room, Bernard is sobbing and pleading for his decision to change to be reconsidered. Mond confesses to the others that he is jealous of Bernard since the islands where he has been sent are home to some of the most fascinating individuals on the planet. Whoever is unable to live under the rule of a world state, it is Helmholtz's preference to be banished on an island where the weather is poor, and Mond agrees. Afterward, John and Mond continue their discussion about society, and John ultimately tells Mond that he prefers to live in a world where religion, poetry, and goodness are celebrated. Despite Mond's warnings, John refuses to give up his longing for unhappiness. Bernard and Helmholtz want to go with John to the island, but Mond declines because he wants to examine John more thoroughly. John was farewelled by Bernard and Helmholtz the next day. After a while, John makes the decision to relocate to a remote lighthouse. It becomes a habit for him to engage in rituals of self-punishment, in which he physically punishes himself. Some of his co-workers eventually see him doing this, and he's uncovered by the media. John is enraged and violent in his response to the reporters. A video of him whipping himself was released to the media thanks to the efforts of a single reporter. Lenina visits John after learning about his whereabouts. When he sees her, he snaps and labels her a strumpet. The spectators are enthralled by the show. The following day, John commits suicide by hanging himself in his lighthouse. Characters: John, the abnormally born son of the director of the hatchery and a woman named Linda. Only a few children in the world state are the product of a live mother, and John is one of them. Natural delivery is still practiced on an Indian reservation, but John is still regarded an outsider because of his mother's promiscuity. 2 books that his mother had with her during her illness were the only ones that John learned to read from as a little child. A lifelong admirer of his mother's stories of her travels, John eagerly accepts Bernard's proposal to return to London with him, where he may see the world for the first time. After arriving in London, he rapidly realizes how depressing and hopeless the state of the world state is, and he longs to be free of it once more. To the point of self-flagellation, John chastises, and, subsequently, physically whips, himself whenever he thinks a sinful idea. Lenina is spurned by him since he deems his sexual attraction to her sinful. Despite being raised to believe that his mother is a depraved slut, John maintains a deep affection for her. When she dies, he is devastated and seeks solace in a lighthouse, where he lives alone. After he realizes that he cannot escape the immorality he feels inside of him and the weight of contemporary technology, John commits suicide. Bernard Marx, an alpha caste male who doesn't fit in with the rest of his co-workers at the hatchery because of his short stature. Bernard has a lot to say about his dissatisfaction with the current state of the world state. He appears to be plagued by a sense of self-doubt and ultimately dissatisfied with his lot in life. Bernard begins the story as the book's protagonist, but he fades into the background when John is introduced. When Bernard appears in the book, he is always shown as either depressed, angry, or melancholy. He is, on the other hand, shown to be the most human of all the characters. Upon John's return to London, Bernard takes it upon himself to act as John's guardian in order to boost his social stature. Until John fails to perform once, all of the new friends and parties vanish as swiftly as they arrived. When Bernard is exiled to a tropical island at the end of the novel, he breaks into tears and needs to be medicated. We don't learn anything about him when he arrives on the island because he becomes a minor character in the narrative. Lenina Crown, a young nurse at the hatchery. Lenina is well-liked and promiscuous. By the standards of her period, she was a totally typical lady, if rather more monogamous than the average. She is frequently depicted as utilizing the soma medicine to mask her more unpleasant emotions, despite the fact that she is normally happy. On one of their dates, they run across each other's friend Lenina. She was persuaded to go on a date with Bernard, who she has a crush on. Lenina is taken aback by John's disdain for premarital sex and her repeated attempts to entice him, but she can't get him to give in to her advances. When Lenina finally finds John at the end of the novel, he attacks her. After that, we don't see or hear from her character again. Mustafa Mond, resident world controller of Western Europe. The director regards him as a superior figure. It is via his dialogue that we learn the most about the world state's past and current practices in the novel, making Mond a helpful character for readers. At the end of the novel, the world state's viewpoint is most clearly conveyed through John's dispute with him. Mond is a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to Shakespeare. He's both a fan and a banger. Even though his current position requires him to censor new ideas, he was once a scientist who came up with quite a number of his own. Both empathetic and brutal, he is shown to be. Helmholtz Watson, for a main character, Helmholtz is probably the least developed character in the entire book. Male of the alpha caste, characterized by his physical attractiveness and widespread social acceptance. The two share a hatred for the world state and dissatisfaction with their current circumstances. Professor Helmholtz teaches at the College of Emotional Engineering. The hatchery's hypnopedic lessons need him to compose sentences for the children to use. To Helmholtz, this employment is meaningless, and he longs to write something more significant. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.